So a document came out of the Pentagon last week, and it doesn't read like foreign policy analysis, it reads like a list of consequences. What the United States is prepared to do to its closest military partners if they will not fall in line.
Spain threatened with suspension from NATO. The United Kingdom threatened with the loss of American backing over the Falkland Islands. Both of them targeted for one specific reason. They hesitated when Washington launched their unilateral military campaign against Iran and then expected full coalition endorsement.
This is not a Trump rally speech. This is not a Lutnick press conference. This is an internal Pentagon communication describing in writing how the United States now intends to manage its allies, not as partners in a shared security architecture, but as instruments in a compliance campaign. And if you want to understand where Canada stands inside that picture right now, well, this document draws the map.
Let's be precise about the sequence of events here, because it's important. The United States launched military strikes against Iran. That was a unilateral decision between America and Israel. Nothing in NATO's founding charter required allied participation. Nothing in NATO's mandate covers offensive campaigns initiated by one member state acting independently.
NATO's Article 5, the Collective Defense Clause, exists for one purpose. If a member is attacked, the others respond. What it does not say, what is actually never said, is that if one member launches its own offensive operation and then demands coalition endorsement, the rest of the alliance must comply or face consequences. That mechanism simply just doesn't exist within that framework.
Spain said no. The United Kingdom hesitated. Well, that's standard allied behavior inside an alliance that is supposed to operate on deliberation and consent. And Washington's response? Well, according to this internal communication, it was to begin calculating what it would cost those countries for that hesitation.
For Spain, suspension from NATO. And that right there should stop everyone, because you know what? You cannot suspend a member from NATO. There's no provision for it in the North Atlantic Treaty. It's not in the charter. What Trump is proposing is a punishment that has no legal basis inside the institution itself. Not that any legal thing has ever stopped him before. So basically, the pressure is operating entirely outside the rules of the alliance that Washington itself created.
For the United Kingdom, it was something arguably more revealing than the Spain threat, because Washington floated reconsidering its support for Britain's claim to the Falkland Islands. The Falklands, a conflict that Britain fought in 1982, a territorial claim the United States backed at the time, but now it's being positioned as a bargaining chip because London wouldn't endorse an American military campaign that had nothing to do with European defense.
That was what was in this document. Not a speech, not an offhanded comment to a reporter. An internal government communication proposing to treat a historic ally's territorial legitimacy as a compliance instrument. And people need to understand what Article 5 actually says, because there's a really big misconception here. Article 5 does not trigger an automatic military response. The text says member states will take whatever action they deem necessary. That language only carries real operational weight if the countries reading it trust each other's judgment completely. When you strip that trust away, what you have left is a piece of paper with flexible definition. And then last week, a former NATO ambassador went on record saying, basically, this is a weakening of the alliance from the inside. And that's exactly the right characterization. The pressure on the alliance's foundation isn't coming from an adversary pressing on the eastern flank like China or Russia. It's coming from the alliance's own founding power, deciding that the rules are optional when they're inconvenient for them.
Putin is loving this, and it always comes back to Putin because it really seems like Trump is doing his job for him. What that tells you is that USA is no longer operating within the system at all. It's operating around it, and it's substituting raw American power for institutional process.
Yeah, basically what we're seeing here is the Trump model applied to military partnerships, the same structural approach that Canada has been navigating on the trade front for the past year.
So here is where Canada's position becomes very specific, because this is not just a European story that Canada watches from a distance with mild concern.
No, Canada lives inside a deeply integrated American security structure. NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, runs through Canadian aerospace. Shared Arctic Command, continental air defense, surveillance infrastructure. That integration was built on exactly the same foundational assumption that the United States is a predictable partner whose security commitments are stable regardless of Canada's policy decisions.
So this document attaches a formal cost to saying no.
And Canada has been saying no. Clearly, Carney's government has been explicit. Canada makes sovereign decisions. What this week's document adds is written evidence of what the internal American calculation looks like when an ally exercises that sovereignty. Spain and the UK didn't say anything more provocative than Canada has been saying for the past year, and they got a document proposing punishments.
But the countries best positioned right now are not the ones that capitulated earliest. They're the ones that recognized this directional shift before it was documented and started building independent capacity accordingly.
Canada? We're in that group. The bilateral agreements, the Arctic investment, the embedding into the European defense frameworks. Canada executed that sequence because the logic pointed there. This document simply made the logic visible to everybody else. So here's what's being missed in most of the coverage out there. The countries most alarmed by this communication are not actually the ones being threatened. They're the ones watching the threatened countries and doing the math on themselves. Countries like Poland, the Baltic states, Finland, countries that join NATO or deepen their NATO commitment specifically because of what the American security guarantee actually meant. They're now reading that Pentagon document and say, hey, wait a minute, these are the conditions that we agreed to.
And that recalculation is already moving. The European defense spending surge isn't just about filling a gap Washington is leaving. It's about building capacity that doesn't require American political approval to deploy. The logic shifted the moment the guarantee became conditional. These countries understood it before this document appeared. This document simply confirmed what the architecture already told them.
Which means the conversation in Brussels and Warsaw and Helsinki right now isn't how do we get the US back inside? It's how fast can we build something that doesn't depend on Washington's mood being stable, which basically is saying, is there a new NATO that's being formed here?
And this is where Canada faces a real choice, because there are two coherent responses to what this week's Pentagon document establishes.
The first position is deepen the integration on Canada's terms. Stay inside NORAD, stay inside the bilateral frameworks, but use the leverage that Canada has accumulated, the Arctic, the critical minerals, the continental defense geography, to extract formal written commitments that insulate Canada's sovereignty inside this relationship. The argument there is that proximity and integration are strategic assets, not vulnerabilities. Well, if you negotiate them properly.
The second position is to accelerate the European pivot, deepen the defense agreements Canada signed with France, Germany, and the UK, build enough operational independence that the NORAD leverage changes fundamentally, that Canada becomes a transatlantic anchor. That changes what Washington can afford to threaten.
So the Carney government has been signaling the second option. The European agreements, the Arctic investment, the tone of the Munich conversation, and what he said in Davos. And here's what Canada has that Spain and the UK simply do not. Canada is not across an ocean from this decision. Canada is the continental neighbor, the Arctic border, the NORAD infrastructure, the shared intelligence architecture. That integration is not something that Washington can threaten to withdraw cleanly. It's embedded in the American security at a level that Spain's NATO membership Simply isn't.
Washington threatening Spain's NATO standing, well, that cost Spain something real. Washington threatening Canada's bilateral security integration, well, that costs Washington something real as well. The job for Canada now is to strengthen the parts of that relationship that give us some balance. And that means investing in the Arctic, building stronger ties with Europe, and securing our own resources. Each one of those isn't just economic policy, it's a deliberate adjustment to what it would cost the United States to treat Canada as they treated Spain this week.
Because the same logic that makes Canada's position structurally different from Spain's makes Canada an attractive anchor for countries building the capacity that doesn't require the US's approval.
Canada has been dealing with documents like this for a while now. We told you months ago about the Don Road Doctrine, where Trump specifically said that he wants to take over the entire Western Hemisphere. You can check out that video below to see just how dangerous Trump's America has become.
Every country in this story is making that same calculation right now. Canada, we just made it first. The document just confirmed that we were right to do that.
And that's the news for today. Let us know what you think in the comments because we read every single one of them.
Thanks for watching, everybody, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Ciao for now.